Hi, in this video what I'd like to discuss are the 5 biggest mistakes that I believe the Blizzard development team have made with regards to World of Warcraft. This is the one that won the poll for today's topic. If you want to take part in other polls, of course, just see the homepage. If you're subscribed and you've clicked the bell notification, you should be notified of polls for future topics as well. What I'm going to do in this video is to try and discuss what I think are the 5 biggest mistakes, not pieces of content. I'm not going to go through LFR and World Quest and all that stuff. No, it's not about that. It's about philosophical decisions. And I'm going to try and use proverbs as well, reasonably well-known proverbs, to highlight where Blizzard have gone against the wisdom of the ages in a vain attempt to try and prove my point. So the first one, and these are in no particular order, they're just the 5 I fixate on quite a lot of the time, is what I call the artificial restriction on your ability to customize your character. Now, I put this into 2 things. It's the way you make your character appear to everyone else in the world, and then there's also further customization, almost unlimitless customization in the form of player housing. Of course, World of Warcraft doesn't have player housing. It's the only MMO I play ever that doesn't, and I observe players in other MMOs will play the game specifically for that level of customization. They're not bothered about anything else. They will do it just for that. So World of Warcraft, of course, is losing, I'm not going to say how many players, but a potential cohort of players just because it doesn't cater to that. Now, the player housing isn't now going to happen. It would take development time. Let's be honest, it would take a significant amount of development time. I think it would be totally worth it, but it's never going to happen. The reason is this. It would take a development team to do it. They've already been told that they're facing budget cuts, which for the first time ever. We've got a situation at the moment where BFA has launched. At the point at which BFA launched, most of that development team are now supposed to be working on the next expansion. And as far as we know, are, just as the BFA development started proper when Legion launched. But BFA launched in a very unfinished state. So not only have they got to do the development with the developers that remain on it throughout the expansion, not only have they got to do the content that's been planned for BFA, they also need things fixed that take a lot of development time, especially when they don't do it very efficiently, but more on that later. And surely that's going to take developers off the next expansion, Revenge of the Potato People. And that means that the next expansion is also going to be massively rushed and, let's face it, almost inevitably, I don't like to say inevitably, but almost inevitably is also going to come out in an unfinished state. Potentially even worse than BFA. I don't say that I believe that, but I do believe that the next expansion cannot launch in a better state than BFA, because how could it? Because they're effectively going to have to spend less time on it than BFA. They've got budget cuts. I don't see how. I don't see how, without a major change in attitude. But one thing they could do to help us customize our characters is abolish the effectively artificial restrictions on transmog. You know, transmog came in the game during Cataclysm, very popular in many ways, but there are so many things. It's like, oh, that's really cool. I'd like to have my character use that. But they can't because it's the wrong armor type. And what's the purpose for this? Remember, the character... The transmog of our character allows a certain amount of artistic creativity. The proverb I'm going to use for this one is, the aim of art is to represent not the outward appearance of things, but their inward significance. And you can't really express that sometimes if you think, oh, this would be so amazing for my character, but I'm not allowed to do it. And it's not that they're trying to imagine a costume that doesn't exist in the game. It exists. They're just not allowed to do it. Blizzard have put effort into preventing them doing it. They have an argument that it's all about the silhouette. Someone should see the silhouette of a character and sort of know what sort it is. Are they a plate wearer? Are they a cloth wearer? They should sort of know. But then they contradicted that statement by saying, but if you look at heritage armor, you already have this situation, which you do. So, for example, the Dark Iron Dwarf heritage armor very much looks like it ought to be plate, at the very least male, but you'd probably say plate. But a dwarf priest could wear that. So they've already contradicted their own argument anyway, because with heritage armor, you disguise that silhouette anyway. So what value is that silhouette? It's not like any other game, any other MMO places any value on it either. So why do Blizzard, why do we in World of Warcraft, when we know it's something that annoys some players, and it doesn't matter how many players that is, the fact that it irks any players at all and for no reward, for no benefit. What do you gain? But we know that you will lose something. The second thing is the biggie, really, and I think a lot of people definitely agree with this. I really don't see how anyone could disagree with this, and it is the disconnection from the player base. And this runs along several themes. Basically, when people feel that they are not valued as customers, that business loses that customer's loyalty. It doesn't mean they lose their custom. Sometimes people will still shop or buy goods and services from a company that doesn't value them just because, well, it is the best one. I know of people who say they go to restaurants where the customer service is appalling. They're treated very rudely, but the food is really good, so they'll put up with it because the food's so amazing. But, and it's the same thing anywhere. If you go to a particular place and it's the only place you can really buy that product for that quality and the price is all right, even if it's really bad, or delivery is always really badly organised, you can still retain their custom. But there will be players in this game who will leave because once you've lost loyalty, there's no other reason to play. Brand loyalty can actually mean you end up with more customers than your product really deserves because, that company treats us really well. Even if they know the product's not quite where it should be, but they want to do it for that company. They're a big fan of that company. Blizzard used to be known as a really good game studio. They used to be known as a place that really crafts those games and cares about those games and brings them out in a finished state. It used to be a bit of a meme for Blizzard that when are you bringing it out? We'll bring it out when it's ready. Soon TM, all these sort of memes were basically a hallmark for we ain't bringing this game out until it's done. And if we are not happy with it, they talk about the fact there's been projects they've had that have never come to fruition. Project Titan would be the most famous one. If they're not happy with the quality, it doesn't get pushed out. You're going to get pushed out at all costs. Now they're moving away from that, and that is disappointing. And there's a couple of proverbs here I could point at in terms of this disconnect. One, the customer is always right. We know that the customer is very often very wrong, but it is all about this perception. You want customers to be loyal to your brand. You have to at least show that you're listening to them and responding to them. You may not agree with it as developers. You may be thinking to yourself, they don't understand how this works. And it's not the same as doing exactly what they all want, because there's millions of players still, I hope, and not many millions now, I don't think, unfortunately. But there are still 7 digits worth, and we want to be made to feel that they're at least listening to us. And how can they be doing that if they're not responding? Because part of listening, once you finish listening, you then need to say something or do something. And given that they're not saying anything or doing anything, causes a bit of a problem. The fact of the customer being wrong is totally irrelevant. This is entirely about perception. Customers don't pay for goods or services because it's the best for them. They pay for them because they believe it's the best for them. That's why marketing is so important. And the marketing and the public relations with Blizzard in the past few years, frankly, stinks because they're not encouraging customers. There is another one in terms of leadership, because Blizzard need to sort of effectively lead the customers. Loyal customers view the business as a bit of a leader. And another little problem here is position doesn't make anybody a leader. Being in charge doesn't make the wrong person right. Because there's another thing. There are some customers, there are some players who actually know what they're talking about. Senior theory crafters who time after time, even people like me can see some things, and time after time in early alpha will say, this isn't going to work. And not just this isn't going to work, leave it at that. Even though Blizzard say, and lots of games developers in other companies say, oh, that's all we want. We just want you to tell you what doesn't work. We don't want you to say, we don't want to come up with ideas or something like that, which is silly for me because that's just born of arrogance. But when you sort of say this isn't going to work and you give detailed reasons why and they just dismiss it, and then several months later, when it's gone live, they have to concede that it's not working. It's maddening. Do you know how maddening that is to the people that have to keep telling them these things? And are right time and time again. It's not like we're right 1 out of 10 times. It's every single time. You get to be a bit annoyed with it. And also the gradual removal of direct discussion. It used to be the case that you'd get Blizzard developers communicating, all right? They try and use the thing, oh, there's not enough time. There is enough time. They don't have to respond to every post. They don't have to read they don't have to read any post. You know, they've got people to read the post for them and bring important ones to their attention, and they can quick respond to that. It takes no time at all. I work, and I still manage to find time to talk on some forums. So don't give me that. And they used to be able to do it as well. And more importantly, they used to discuss things during the alpha and beta processes. That disappeared in BFA. The only blue posts you ever saw were ones where they wanted to say something to us. That's not communication. Communication is two-way. There were no discussions taking place. Sometimes there was a response, but that response was only to say a thing. But again, there was no back and forth. And they used to be. This is new. This is not something that existed. And they have to accept that there are people in the player base. There may not be many of them, but there are people in the player base who have great insights. And it is an arrogance to say, no, we're the ones who need to make the decisions. Yes, you make the decisions, but that doesn't mean to say you can't listen to advice. You know, suppression of discussions on the forums, for example, the way they've redesigned the forums most recently, again, makes it more difficult to have discussions between different players. They first, I would say, started trying to suppress discussion by suggesting, oh, don't use the forums, or you should tweet things to us. Because Twitter's a terrible format for trying to have a discussion. But of course, all that's going to do, people still want to have discussions. They're not going to put up with what they give us. They'll just have those discussions elsewhere. MMO Champion, Wowhead, Discords. Absolute nonsense. And the proverb I would give for this one, before I move on to the next one, is that none of us is as smart as all of us. And the refusal to even listen to insights is making you weaker. And how could it not? Next one is the failure to attract new players. And this is something that maybe they're now taking seriously. At the start of last year, they introduced level scaling. Of course, the problem is that they just introduced level scaling and they didn't really think it through. So now there's a lot of people seeing negatives with this. But the big problem when it comes to new players, and Blizzard have now said that they need to look at this and they need to look at the leveling experience, but they've also said it's a long-term project, which I believe, but the problem is they're losing players now. The problem with World of Warcraft is, compared to some other MMOs, not all, there are some in this boat as well. As soon as a new expansion comes out, all the previous content just becomes a pointless slog to level up characters. It's completely detached from the game. Think about when we see advertisements for new expansions and think about all the features that are advertised. Okay, so look at Battle for Azeroth. We were, island expeditions, war fronts, the new dungeons, the new raids, the new zones. None of those are really seen by a new player. Okay, a new player could use a level boost, but generally speaking, it's ill-advised for a brand new player to use a level boost because they're missing out on a learning process that leveling provides. Okay? So take the new player who wants to start a character from level 1. Or let's say they use the level boost and then they've misused it. A month or two down the line, they decide they don't want it after all. So they've got to level up. That takes a long time. Is that player, when they start playing that game, able to do island expeditions? No. Are they able to do the world quest? No. Are they able to do the war fronts? No. Are they able to do the new dungeon? I could go on. No. It's a very different game. The leveling game in World of Warcraft is very different to the end game in World of Warcraft. Completely different. It's not the same in all MMOs. It is in a lot of them. And the problem with that is that, first of all, what you're trying to do to attract people to play that new expansion, it's a very different experience for that new player. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't new players, and I'm not saying that there aren't new players who really love the game. There are, because they say so. But there's a much greater number. First of all, I think would be put off by, if they're looking forward to the content that needs level 110 at least, but realistically getting up to 120, then those same players are going to be a bit daunted by what they've got to do to get to that content. But the other thing is, that's all fine if they're actually enjoying their leveling. But if they're not, if they don't enjoy the leveling experience in WoW, doesn't mean they wouldn't enjoy the endgame. They might think the endgame's brilliant. we're not going to find out because they're not really going to get to it, especially if they're minded not to use that boost because they're thinking to themselves, then I'm going to miss out. I get this character, it's got all these things and I don't know how to use it. It's all overwhelming. And the problem with it is that they've never really had a team, and they should have had a team for every expansion that basically thought, right, how are we going to knit together these two experiences? How are we going to get it so that a new player is fully involved in the game and is going to enjoy it to the point where they're going to get to that end game? And they never have. They're now saying that they're thinking about it, but who knows what that's going to be. But they're also saying long-term project. Long-term project, to me, suggests at a minimum something we may see in the next expansion. But it may not even be then, or it might come in piecemeal. The problem with piecemeal, though, is just like with the level scaling. If you just bring a thing in, it should really be a coordinated change to the game. If it's not, you run the risk of, you put a feature in the game, and there's some people don't like it. Like, I'll give you the example of level scaling. Some people don't like the fact now when they gain a level, they get weaker. And the reason you get weaker is because your gear has the same stats, but those stats are now worth a smaller percentage of crit, hit, haste, and all the rest of it. And the mobs, of course, have all got a level higher and so on. Now, of course, if people always in the old style when it wasn't level scaling would just abandon the mobs they were doing and go to the higher level mobs anyway, okay, they may not care about that. But for the players who just wanted to play through quests, they're getting a level. Their character apparently is more powerful, but it's actually not more powerful. It's weaker, and it feels weaker. Now, that's not a problem with level scaling as such. There are other games that have level scaling where this is not an issue. You do feel stronger when you go up a level, even with level scaling. It's because all they did was put level scaling in. They didn't really put the other things alongside it that make it all work. They're adding things in a bit at a time. And each individual bit, of course, is nowhere near as great as the sum of its parts. But the sum of its parts is not there. So people don't see the advantage. Or at least some people don't. And again, a little proverb I'm going to give here in terms of Blizzard telling people what to do instead of actually putting stuff in that people want to do. I like this one. It says, you don't lead by pointing and telling people some place to go. You lead by going to that place and making a case. The fourth one for me, big mistake, is from a lore point of view, which is retconning. Now, many AAA MMOs, if you look at them, are produced by game studios who had to purchase a license to use an existing franchise. So as such, they're not really masters of their own background lore, and they have to treat it with a little respect. They can bend it here and there, but that's about it. Blizzard own it all. Okay, they own their background stories, so they can do what they like with it, and frequently do. They have changed established storylines and then sometimes changed those storylines again and again. They were talking recently about how there are so many people involved in the storytelling process. I have always felt that really to have a coherent story, you need one person who has overall charge of everything. And you can't say, oh, it's far too complex for one person. Absolute nonsense. World of Warcraft has, by now, an impressive background lore. It is nowhere near as impressive as Tolkien lore. And that was one person, okay? His son has done a bit of rewriting to push some out since, but that was one guy doing it, spent his life doing it. It can be done and cobbled into some sort of sense by one person. However, I'm not suggesting it has to be done by one person. You sometimes have decent writing teams, 2, maybe 3 at the most, people who are good at bouncing ideas off each other, have respect for each other, but nonetheless they need to work closely together. What was revealed is that not only are there lots of storytellers and things like that, which is why we keep getting these inconsistencies, but they go to the other teams and tell them about it, not just to inform them, but to get ideas. And they say, oh, and those people feed into it as well, and their ideas are used. This is an absolute nightmare. They talked about it as if it's a strength, but it is the most terrible weakness. A well-known proverb in this case would, of course, be too many cooks spoil the broth. But Homer, not Homer Simpson, Homer of Iliad fame, he said something different, which is too many kings can ruin an army. And this is very true. The thing is, I was reading something not too well. It was for BFA. Obviously, I've put my predictions out as to how I think the story of BFA is going to go, and someone was saying, one of the developers was, I can't remember who it was now. It may have even been Terran Gregory, but I can't remember. But they were basically saying, how great it is that you think you know what's going to happen, but we put these little twists in, and then it's not what you think is going to happen at all. Here is the thing. If those little things you put in are clever plot twists, then yes, you can be rightly proud of doing that. It's like writing a good murder mystery. You're given the information and you come to a conclusion, but it's the wrong conclusion. But when you find out what the real conclusion is, you go, oh yeah, I missed that. That's clever writing. What's not clever writing is when your conclusion relies on you changing the established law. Because of course people can't predict it then. That's not because you've put subtle clues in that people have missed. That's because you've just changed the story. That's not clever. In fact, that's quite the reverse of clever. And that's actually really annoying. Because one thing that people like to do, I like to do this, they like to read around the law and they like to think, oh, okay, so let's see where this is going. And actually, it is fun. If we go along a particular trajectory and then we find out it goes in a different direction, but we could have predicted it if we'd have noticed something, we didn't put enough emphasis on a piece of information that we did have, that's actually good. That's like, oh yeah, this is good. It's engaging. But when they don't, when they just go, we're changing this story now. Oh, Azeroth's not a planet, it's a blancmange. I didn't see that coming. No, of course we didn't see it coming. Bloody hell. Anyway, let's go on to the last one. The last one is not working efficiently in terms of design. BFA was notable for a few things. First of all, it didn't launch in anything like a ready state. 2, testers and theory crafters, I've already said, told them about issues early on. Blizzard dismissed them. And also they spent a lot of development time on features that nobody wanted. And at least one is having even more serious development time now in being unpicked for the next expansion. And that is the idea that what they did, and some people not necessarily aware of this, but what theorycrafts are working out when you sim these things, there isn't in BFA a massive amount of difference between playing a character well, playing a spec really well, this is for DPS purposes, and just hitting, ooh, shiny button, click that, ooh, shiny button. There isn't a huge amount. It's like, for some specs, it's 1% difference. For some, it's a few percent difference. The irony is, the old Wreck Paladins get a meme, we're actually one with the largest gap at the moment. But that was a deliberate, and it couldn't not be a deliberate decision when it was happening for all DPS specs. But it was a deliberate decision. But it was a stupid decision, which they've now recognised as being stupid. So not only did they waste a lot of development time doing that, they're now going to waste even more development, except it's not wasted now, but it never had to be done in the first place. Therefore, it is wasted development time, making sure it's not going to be like that for the next expansion. There are other things as well. Look, the global cooldown changes. That was something that people weren't asking for. And although some people may approve, many people do not. It was something that wasn't needed and wasn't asked for. But it cost them a lot of development time. Because when they implemented it, there was such an uproar. They had to then have meetings and decide what to take it off and what to put it on in a totally haphazard, inconsistent way. And taking up lots of man hours that needed to be spent on the things that have now launched unfinished. And for what? And it's because they're not capable of of weighing up reward against cost. The cost was high. The reward was negligible. In fact, I would say negative, in fact. And it's the proverb I'm going to use here, and there's a couple of proverbs coming up, but for this one, I would say, it is not always that we need to do more, but rather than we need to focus on less. And that's the key thing. If you were to reel off the key features in any expansion, there's only a handful. BFA, island expeditions, war fronts, is there even anything else? I suppose the war campaign. We'll say the war campaign. Other things are features that, already existed. There's only 3 things there, but they needed to be belters. And they should have focused on those 3 things. Okay? They should have allowed the class design team to design the classes, but they didn't. To be fair to the class designers, it's not really their fault where some of these specs are. It's because You know, they were working to a plan and then Blizzard threw this thing in. Oh, by the way, we're going to do this now. Oh, so they've got to rethink their plan, come up with another plan, do that. Then they throw something else on top of them as well. So they've never really been able to plan towards a common goal. And the teams, another thing is teams that should work cooperatively don't. It was obvious anyway, but Ian Hazacostas basically owned up to this after Tomb of Sargeras and Legion. I've talked about this before. People were noticing that Mythic Mode, there were soaks on almost every boss. There was like all but one bosses had soak mechanics. It was all, I think Bay was also who came up with the term Tomb of Sargeras. And Ian Hazacostas, this was... And the reason was because they all talked about the general fights. And then all these encounter designers went off into their own little teams and then designed it themselves without talking to each other. And there was no one person coordinating it all. So that's an example of one team that has no level of coordination. No one in charge. That's all that is. If there's someone in theory in a position where they're supposed to be in charge of that team, they're not doing their job. Because at the very least, you should be going around. That person should have an overview of what's going on. They clearly didn't. And then there are teams that should coordinate. Encounter design teams should coordinate very closely with class design teams. Now, they said that they were going to sort that out. I see zero evidence of that. There's no evidence whatsoever. The classic example, there's a number of examples if you really picture it, but the really obvious example with Uldir was, say, Mithrax. So Mithrax spawning the bubbles meant that you really didn't want to take a lot of melee in there. The number of melee you could take in was in direct proportion to the intelligence of those melee players and their awareness. If you have melee players who are very self-aware and talk to each other, because it's not a case of just having your positions. If a bubble lands on you, you've got to shift that position, but still not spawn another bubble on someone else. So there's a lot of awareness, selflessness, teamwork, and communication needed. If you have that, you could probably take a few more than most guilds could. Because most guilds, they know that some of their melee at least will be just tunneling DPS and pay no attention to anything. So that meant you had to massively restrict the number of melee. And it was a classic case between the encounter design team not really talking, because class designers definitely would. I'm surprised the encounter designers didn't think of it, but class designers would have definitely said, hang on a minute, what's that about? And then what did they do? They removed that ability from melee, so it couldn't happen on melee. It's fairly common for some things that would be excessively restrictive for melee to not work on them, unless, of course, you're basically only taking melee. Hard luck for the range, but the range can usually deal with it better. But when they removed it, they didn't reduce the number of these things that spawn. So now, it wasn't just that only the range were having to deal with it, which meant you could take more melee. The ranged players were getting spammed with it. So they were now having a hugely unreasonable time of it. Not just annoying, unreasonable. Because they were getting hit with all of them. They hadn't reduced the number. And it's just a lack of coordination, a lack of thinking. And when they have to make these knee-jerk reactions, they just do it quickly without thinking it through. And you end up with almost as big a mess, if not as big a mess at the end of it. And so the teams need to link up. But the only way they will link up, they need leadership. They need people who know how to coordinate teams. And the final proverb I'm going to give on this one is, I do like this one. It says, teamwork is the ability to work together toward a common vision. The ability to direct individual accomplishments towards organisational objectives. It is the fuel that allows common people to attain uncommon results. Now, pick that aside. Teamwork is the ability to work together toward a common vision. Throughout the development process of BFA, there was no common vision. They kept changing it. They kept changing design philosophies. They should have been established at the start, and they weren't. The next one, the ability to direct individual accomplishments towards organisational objectives. If there ever have been organisational objectives, and I suppose there must be some, those people are not being directed. Those individuals, there's too many individuals just working as individuals, and it's not their fault. They're not being led properly. And as a result, you can have any number of brilliant designers working in the World of Warcraft team. And it's clear that there are many, but they are not working in a coordinated way. Imagine getting the greatest footballers on the planet in each of the 11 positions and just throwing them in a team, not giving them any training, not getting them to work together, not giving them any general strategies. Go and play football. they will never play as well as each of those will individually in a team of even lesser players, but working in a coordinated way. And this is something that either Blizzard just don't seem to understand or don't have the ability to make it happen. And it's annoying because it means even if they do have great ideas, they can't ever come to fruition because they don't have the ability to make them happen. So anyway, those are my 5 biggest mistakes that I think Blizzard have made with World of Warcraft. Let me know what you think, of course, in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, don't forget to give it a like. Subscribe for further content. Share with other people who might also be interested. And until next time, I'll see you later.